The story of Mary of Magdala encountering the risen Christ in the Gospel of John has particularly a special significance to me on a very personal level. Somewhere in the early 1970s, my father received a phone call from his sister. She said, "Park, Dad has died." I remember the rushing back and forth, loading everything into the car, driving that evening into Oklahoma to my grandfather's place. Now, the lights were on in the house. The cars were parked all out around as we expected. My aunt lived with my grandfather. And my parents get up out of the car. And we, of course, are close behind, the three of us boys having the job of struggling with the luggage behind them. And my dad enters into the doorway of the house. And when he does, he stops dead in his tracks, frozen. Now, we're trying to get around him. The look on his face is just really weird, and he's not moving. But finally, after a couple of seconds, he moves aside, and we practically fall into the house, and we look up. And there, sitting in the easy chair in the corner of the room, the center of attention, talking and visiting with everyone who was gathering around, was my grandfather. Now remember, we spent the entire day gearing up to the fact that our grandfather had died. In those days, we went to every stinking funeral, period. I mean, even though we were children, we knew what death meant. We knew what it was, and that entire drive and the day leading up to it, we had been grieving. And yet, when we walk into the house, there he is, alive and well. Well, it turns out the phone reception hadn't been terribly good, and my aunt had not said, "Dad has died," but she said Ed, their brother, had died. But I'll never forget that moment of disorientation and confusion and the feeling of something else just for a second. I mean, just a brief flickering second, a feeling of awe. Well, back to Mary in the Gospel of John. She knows Jesus is dead. And she wasn't like the other disciples who ran away. She and the other women stuck with him until he died. She watched it all. There were absolutely no mistakes. And if anyone was really unclear about that, a Roman soldier was there to run him through with the spear just to make certain. So it's the third day of the week. Early in the morning by the tomb, Mary finds it empty. Confused and grieving, she encounters someone who she mistakes as a caretaker. She asks him, "Have you taken him? Would you please show me where his body is?" Then he says her name. The earthquake in her heart was greater than any previously experienced physically, like when the angel, according to Matthew, rolled the stone away. Because when he says Mary, she reacts. She knows that voice. And when Jesus says Mary, I think I might just have a tiny inkling of something that she might have felt at that moment. When she hears that voice, everything changes for her and for the world, for our world. Because you see, we live in a world that struggles with death. And especially now, in the time of the coronavirus and COVID-19, we fear death. We hate death. And I gotta say, rightly so, he is not a friend. He robs us of our relationships. He haunts our very decisions. And in the end, no matter how healthy we are, no matter how cautious we try to be and safe we try to stay, he is always there just waiting. But in the cross and in the resurrection, everything changes. See, on the cross, Jesus allows all of the evil of the world to pour itself out on him. He allows Satan and the principalities and the powers to do their worst. And he even allows death to take him. But in that very moment, on the cross, he exposed sin and death and the powers for what they are, pretenders and defeated foes. And when his body comes up out of the tomb, He defeats death, according to Paul. He defeats the last enemy. And in so doing, he guarantees that one day we too will experience the same kind of resurrection. That's in 1 Corinthians 15 and Romans 18 and other passages. Our bodies are going to come up out of the grave, never to die again. And at that point, the statement will be true: death, where's your sting? Grave, where's your victory? So for tomorrow night, I want you to reflect on the cross, and especially reflect on Colossians 2:15, which says, "And having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross." And on this Sunday, praise God in the face of uncertainty that Jesus rose from the dead. He calls us by our name. We hear his voice. And that changes everything.